Hello, everyone. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you have tuned in. And welcome to this side event jointly organized by the Carnegie Climate Governance Initiative, C2G, and the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP. My name is Xizheng, and I'm the outreach officer with C2G. It's my pleasure to be the facilitator of this event today, and I'm very much looking forward to it. To discuss about carbon dioxide removal, understand their role in reaching the Paris Agreement goals, their associated governance challenges, and how those challenges could be addressed in the context of Sustainable Development Goals. We today have a group of esteemed speakers to share their insights and perspectives on those issues. So first of all, I wish to introduce very briefly about C2G. For people who are not familiar with us, the Carnegie Climate Governance Initiative is a small and foundation-funded initiative. Our mission is to catalyze the creation and the strengthening of governance for climate-altering approaches, in particular for solar radiation modification and large-scale carbon dioxide removal. C2G is impartial with regard to the potential use or not of any of these proposed approaches or interventions. Those are the choices to be made by the society as a whole. On the other hand, we wish to contribute to and encourage society-wide discussions and deliberation on those challenging issues by working with a number of stakeholders, including intergovernmental organizations, governments, and civil societies. So to that end, we partner with ESCAP to bring this issue to the region. I'm sure Stefanos will speak in more detail about ESCAP's work on climate change and why he thinks that CDR, carbon dioxide removal, is relevant for the region. So coming back to our event today, we have about less than 90 minutes. We will start with a keynote speech, and then there will be a panel discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A session with the participant. In the end, we will have a very quick wrap up. So without overdue, I will give the floor to Stefanos Fotiou, the Director of Environment and Development Division of ESCAP. Stefanos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome from my side to all the participants, and very thank to you and also my colleagues in ESCAP, Aneta, that you have put together this event. I think it's quite important to talk about a set of technologies actually, an approach, the carbon dioxide removal, which it starts to be quite in the forefront, I would say, on the discussion of climate action. And why this is important? Because we have seen in this region that many of us were working and living for the last years, that the climate change have a lot of substantive impacts in the region. The frequency and severity of the natural disasters, the climate-induced disasters, it intensifies. We have really seen that we are not making any progress when it comes to delivering the Sustainable Development Goals, and this becomes a big challenge. And we do have assessments indicating that despite some current government commitments to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions, they continue to rise, and they are in a trajectory of warming of over 3 degrees Celsius and posting increasing risk. So this is extremely far away from the 1.5 degree that we want to achieve with the Paris Agreement. And we have seen the impacts of climate change, not only in terms of disasters, but the impact in different sectors. We have seen how agricultural productivity has been reduced in many areas of Asia Pacific and in the world. And we have seen how this has also contributed to an increase, to a very big increase on the price of main agricultural commodities, making actually basic food more expensive for the poor. So a direct impact of climate change on increasing poverty and increasing the possibilities of having more hunger at a point that we try to completely eradicate hunger. We are not in the region in any possible track to achieve the SDG for 13 targets, the climate change goal. The projected greenhouse gas emissions is to grow to 50 gigatons by 2060. And this actually shows that the nationally determined contributions are very far away and they are falling to support the Paris Agreement targets. So climate change and climate-induced disasters, it's the two fundamental socioeconomic threats to sustainable development in Asia and Pacific. So there's a very big need to accelerate ambitious climate mitigation and adaptation to safeguard the development gains that they have made the last decades and to rapidly transition towards zero carbon, equitable, and climate and disaster resilient development as we recover from COVID-19 and make this recovery greener. So we have seen that, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but the numbers are not in our favor. We have seen that we are nowhere to achieve the 1.5 degrees targets. We are increasing the greenhouse gas emissions. So allow me to say that we are a little bit desperate and we need to find any possible way to reduce the emissions. And this morning we had a very nice event on the interface of mitigation and adaptation. And I would say, okay, adaptation is happening, but for how much we can adapt? At one point, we will not be able to adapt. So we need really to look at the mitigation seriously. So one of the measures that we have put in the agenda to achieve the Paris Agreement is the carbon dioxide removal. Actually, if we see scenarios coming from IRENA, coming from other agencies that they are looking at the energy mix, we see that the carbon dioxide removal is part of these scenarios. And the IPCC also has started making some work on this issue. So in Asia Pacific, we need to consider the carbon dioxide removal, but it's extremely important not to consider it as a substitute of climate action, but as a supplementary measure that we can intensify existing climate action. So we should not see the carbon dioxide removal as something that we should start doing because we will stop doing the transition to the green renewable energy, but something auxiliary that we should do it only if we have scientific certainty that it will create only positive impact. So the carbon dioxide removal, it looks to address the primary drivers of climate change by removing the carbon dioxide. And I would like to highlight 3 issues on why it is important to have this kind of discussion. And I would say it's important to have discussion within the platforms and frameworks of the UN system and this platform, the climate weeks, that they are actually contributing to the COP, to the climate COP. One is the big scientific uncertainty we have. So if we look at the IPCC reports, we see that there is a theoretical potential on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time, there's a lot of warnings about the potential negative impacts that this technology might have. Another thing is that even if we are in a position that we will have absolute scientific certainty that these technologies will not have any negative impacts and will have only positive impacts, there's a question on who is controlling these technologies, because we will be talking about very big infrastructure projects that they will be even altering the way that we are doing business today. So who is going to control this? Anytime I'm listening for the carbon dioxide removal and other technologies like the solar radiation modification, I'm remembering a movie. It's about more than 20 years ago. It's the first Avengers movie, where you had a mad scientist there. It was the Sir Auguste de Winter, but the Winter was with a Y, and he was altering the weather. He could create storms, he could create droughts, he could create everything. So when you have a button that you can do massive technological things and altering the carbon in the atmosphere, the question is who is having authority and who is having to control this button. Then the third point why the discussion is extremely important is because I think we need to go to the policymakers, not with the complicated solutions and start talking to them a complicated science language, but we need to take all the scientific evidence and translate it to very concrete and applicable policy recommendations. And I think this is something that it should come from science. All the policy recommendations should be science-based, but we need to look at the recommendation from a point of view of the policymakers, which are looking at the greater development issues, at the greater social issues, at the greater environmental issues. So we have the different CDR options. Many of them, actually, they have a lot of CDR options that they are nature-based, and probably we could start from there because probably these are the ones that they will not have a lot of negative impact. And it's essential to learn about these approaches and their potential benefits, and of course, the risk in the context of the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and to ensure that implementation at national, regional, and international level maximize the synergies between these agendas and minimizes the trade-off. So in ESCAP, the last 2 years, we have started a more systematic work on climate action. We are working to identify what is the different levels of climate readiness of our member states and to support them on raising their climate ambition. And to this end, in all the efforts we do to support our member states to raise our climate ambition, we are partnering with the C2G to increase the awareness of national and regional actors through this event and through other events we have done before and will continue to do. And let me also say that in collaboration with the C2G, we have launched a thematic area on climate altering approaches in the SDG help desk portal of ESCAP. I would appreciate if the colleagues at one point they put in the chat and they project probably the web page that participants could connect and see this portal. And I want to close by thanking all the panelists, the good colleagues that they have accepted to be in this event today. I'm looking forward to a very productive discussion. I have to apologize because I will not be able to stay for the wrap-up as originally I was planning, as I had a last-minute urgent meeting. But I will be looking forward to listen to this discussion and hopefully take recommendations that we can get back to our member states. Thank you very much, and Cheers, back to you.
Well, thank you, Stefanos, for this very comprehensive overview of the situation, very challenging situation in the Asia Pacific region, and how you see CDR's relevance for the region. And also you pointed out very important governance issues around these approaches or technologies. Much appreciated. And also you were able to make a link with the solar radiation modification that we're working on as well, which we think is much more challenging than carbon dioxide removal. And of course, we look forward to working with ESCAP on those issues as well. Now, we come to the panel discussion, which will be moderated by a colleague from ESCAP, Aneta Nikolova. Just a few words about the mechanics. All participants may type in their questions in the Q&A box of the Zoom interface. Please do mention the name of the speaker if your question is directed to a particular speaker, and please be short and clear. Only those questions relevant to the theme of the event will be considered. We will try to answer as many questions as we can during the time we have. You may vote for the questions you like, as the most popular questions have higher chances of being addressed. So Aneta, over to you now. Also, I invite our panelists to turn on their cameras and microphones.
Thank you very much, G, and thank you very much, Stefanos, for giving us a heads up on the topic that we are going to discuss today. This is very timely, as you mentioned, and carbon dioxide removal in the framework of the Paris Agreement is a very important topic. So with this side event, we will be able to hear different perspectives from colleagues from other UN agencies, UN regional commissions, other regions, and from civil society academia. So with that, I would like now to ask our panelists. We have 5 very distinguished panelists to introduce themselves. Should I start with Dechen, please?
Thank you, Annette, and good afternoon, good morning, colleagues. I'm Dechen Siring. I'm the Regional Director for UN Environment Program in Asia Pacific.
And then we are moving forward to Joyshi Roy.
Yeah, I'm Joyashree Roy from Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand, and Jadavpur University in Kolkata, in India. I'm trained as an economist and then as environmental economist. One of my research focus is to understand how human actions in response to climate change can it be more synergistic to multiple dimensions of human well-being and sustainable development.
Thank you very much. Okay, Oliver.
Hello, my name is Oliver Gedden. I'm with the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. The German abbreviation is SWP. This institute advises the German government and parliament on foreign policy. I'm an expert on European Union climate policy, specifically on carbon dioxide removal. And like Joyashree, she did mention that I'm also in the IPCC, in the upcoming team of the upcoming Working Group 3 report, where I also work on carbon dioxide removal.
Thank you very much. And then our last speaker on the list is Jan Cairo Guillermo.
Thank you so much. Good morning from Geneva. I am Jan Cairo Guillermo. I am from Leyte, Philippines. I am a survivor of the world's strongest typhoon back in 2013. And I'm also a former government official at a very young age. And currently, I am interning as Secretariat of the Water and Climate Coalition in the World Meteorological Organization. My work focuses on using the arts and the sociocultural behavior of the people in raising awareness about climate crisis. So, yeah, good morning again from Geneva.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to start with our questions. I'm very keen to hear from Mr. Chinsaring. What would you say about, we know about the UNEP GAPS report and the IPCC findings, and also the joint research we've done together on the NDC implementation review last year. So it seems that our region is off track, and we know that there are potential negative impacts of CDR. So can you tell us about the role of CDR? How do you view that? What is the advocacy UNEP is putting forward to supplement efforts to net zero? Thank you very much, Atish.
Thank you very much, Aneta. And let me start with thanking the C2G and UN-ESCAP for inviting UNEP. I really wanted to focus a little bit today. We've already heard some of the statistics about the importance of needing to look at carbon dioxide removals to achieve the temperature goals under the Paris Agreement. So when you talk about the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade, and we're looking at limiting it to no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade, if carbon dioxide emissions reach net zero by 2050. I was talking to the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, and they had mentioned that 30% of the glacial lakes in the Himalayas would melt at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we're really looking at needing to remove emissions. With the current nationally determined contributions, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, it's going to be inadequate to stabilize global temperature rise by 1.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. And when we look at the emissions gap report, we've got figures that countries need to take a quantum leap in emission reductions, globally a 7.6% reduction every year from 2020 to 2030. And we need to have this reflected in the current nationally determined contributions of 2020. So we're needing to set really strong decarbonization targets and timelines to reach these targets. And of course, the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees centigrade when we look at carbon dioxide removal, we need to compensate for ongoing emissions in sectors that are hard to decarbonize for achieving peak warming around the time of net zero carbon dioxide emissions. So with the UNEP emissions gap report and other assessments have highlighted, they've highlighted a lot of risks associated with carbon dioxide reduction, such as permanency and adverse environmental impacts. The current global energy system, we're looking is highly carbon intensive with coal, oil, natural gas. That's currently meeting 85% of all energy needs. And if you look at a transition, if the transition doesn't occur, we're looking at increasing greenhouse gas emissions year on year. So it's important to review the different carbon dioxide removal options for sectors that are hard to decarbonize energy, such as steel and cement, which account for about 17% of total carbon dioxide emissions from energy and industrial sources. We know carbon dioxide removal options need to be considered along with other options, and we see many easy wins. I mean, renewable energy, energy efficiency. You look at electrification, policy measures for coal phase out for rapid decarbonization, the energy system. You look at decarbonizing transport, and here there are large air pollution co-benefits. But if you look at some of the approaches under discussion and you talk about nature-based approaches such as enhancement of terrestrial and coastal carbon storage in plants and soils through afforestation and restoration, conservation, restoration management options for natural managed land, and engineering-based approaches such as carbon capture and storage. We've seen many countries in the nationally determined contributions have stressed both mitigation and adaptation efforts. They've strongly linked them to sustainable national development. And we've seen that more than 70% of the NDCs cover agriculture, land use change, forestry options to reduce emissions of greenhouse gas by reducing deforestation, forest degradation, conservation, enhancing forest carbon stocks through afforestation, reforestation, revegetation, and sustainable management of forests, soils, wetland restoration. We've also seen that while NDCs cover several nature-based approaches for carbon dioxide removal, only around 17% of NDCs have quantifiable and robust targets related to nature-based solutions. Similarly, although 70% of NDCs estimated references to efforts in the forest sector, only 20% of these include quantifiable targets. So this suggests that considerable potential remains for countries to strengthen the role of nature-based solutions in their nationally determined contributions. The benefits of taking action could not be clearer. We're finding that if you restore nature, reimagine how we use it, it can deliver up to a third of climate action needed by 2030 to keep us within the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. Several countries in Asia and the Pacific region have also announced their carbon neutral targets, but they've not yet described how they will get to net zero. So it is important that carbon removal solutions are reviewed and considered while updating nationally determined contributions and carbon neutral targets. And I also wanted to reiterate that carbon dioxide removal is not a replacement of emission reduction, but rather a complementary measure to achieve the Paris Agreement temperature goals. This option needs to be pursued along with scaling up renewable energy, for electrification, policy measures for coal phase out, for rapid decarbonization of the energy system, and to decarbonize transport with large pollution co-benefits. So if I can end maybe UNEP and UN-ESCAP, we co-chair an issue-based coalition on climate change mitigation and air pollution in the Asia-Pacific region. And we're looking at policy measures, and we focused on coal phase-out. And the coal phase-out working group has started to work in countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Vietnam. We've really focused on the efforts of actually the 15 UN agencies and the resident coordinators, the country teams, with a look to COP26. We've also started to do, there's been quite a lot of, in advance In advance of COP26, members of the coalition are preparing regional progress review analysis and policy briefs on nationally determined contributions, including the impact of enabling activities, also developing macroeconomic modeling of how carbon pricing instruments support emission reduction trajectories and socioeconomic development. But what we're finding is that many of the solutions are there. It's not coordinated approaches. There's a lot that we can do together. The agencies, a lot of, we're working with multilateral development agencies, with research institutions. We need to start to work to support countries to coordinate approaches. But in terms of carbon dioxide removal, and if you look at the impacts of climate change in the Asia Pacific region, we really have to explore all options. We'll have to explore all technological options, recognizing that there are governance issues, but we do have intergovernmental mechanisms for governance issues. So with this, Aneta, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. This was very, very interesting intervention, and of course, and thank you for introducing the work of the IPC as well. And now I would like to give the floor to Jayashree Roy, please, and to ask you to respond to the following. What do you think the potential for carbon dioxide removal technologies and techniques? What kind of techniques that are possible to use the oceans for carbon dioxide removal would like to mention and to consider here in your response? And could you give us a quick review on proposed approaches and how we could link CDR to the Sustainable Development Goals dimension?
Yeah, but I think I would start from the fact that we really need to consider that CDR should not be looked at as a single standing action. It should be looked at with other options. So when we have seen that this can be thought of for residual emission management, right? So I would first like to highlight on the mitigation options based on ocean system, and then would go for the what it means for the CDR and what our findings say. So I do agree with the fact that oceans are the key defenders against climate change, as they absorb 20 to 30% of the carbon emissions already. And we cannot forget that 70% of the Earth's surface is ocean. So ocean-based mitigation options, our studies show, could reduce the emissions gap by up to 21% on a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. In our report of high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy in 2019, coordinated by the World Resources Institute, we reiterated the link between climate change, ocean health, and human well-being. Estimates show ocean-based mitigation options could reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per annum in 2030, and by more than 11 billion tons per annum in 2050, relative to projected business as usual emissions. And reductions of this magnitude are larger than the emissions from all current coal-fired plants running worldwide. So we defined actually five ocean-based climate actions: ocean-based renewable energy, ocean-based transport, coastal and marine ecosystems, the ocean-based food system, and carbon storage in the seabed. Ocean-based renewable energy production currently offers the greatest potential for delivering clean energy and reducing greenhouse gases, followed by ocean-based transport and then coastal and marine ecosystems. When wider impacts on environment and social well-being are considered, nature-based interventions in coastal ecosystem, especially protection and restoration of mangroves, seagrass and salt marshes offer the best combination of carbon mitigation and broader co-benefits. While innovation is required to improve many specific technologies and practices, 4 of the ocean-based climate actions are ready to be implemented today. These are the renewable energy, ocean-based renewable energy, marine shipping and transport, coastal and marine ecosystems, the ocean-based food system. This could offer many co-benefits in terms of creating jobs, improving air quality and human health, and supporting livelihood if implementation addresses trade-offs with sustainable development dimensions appropriately. Now, the environmental trade-offs and risks include the damage that can be done to coastal ecosystem or marine species by unplanned growth in coastal aquaculture or renewable energy installations. For example, mitigation options aimed at rebuilding fish stocks and other ocean biomass can negatively impact poverty reduction and employment targets and limit progress on food security targets in the short term. The analysis we also showed that all ocean-based mitigation options will need strong national institutions, engagement of business and industry, and community involvement and international cooperation to pursue the planned implementation and how it maximizes the positive impact and limits the negative impact on sustainable development dimensions. And we could not include the ocean-based carbon removal, dioxide removal quite a lot because of a lot of uncertainty in the current level of knowledge.
Thank you very much for your fantastic intervention, and we learned a lot about the potential for carbon sequestration from even from the use of the oceans, even when we do also renewable energy, and the possible risks when it is unplanned and it's too intensive. Thank you very much for that intervention. Now I would like to invite Luis Grieger, our colleague from the Latin American Commission, United Nations Commission, Economic Commission, to present himself first, and then to also share with us, because now we can see him very well, and I think we hear him very well, also to share with us the experiences of, I know you guys have done a report, a study on the potential of CDR use in Latin America. And if you could share a little bit with us the potential of the risks and positive impacts of CDR. Thank you very much, Luis. The floor is yours now.
Well, this is the thematic area that we are discussing here in this event is really very important. And for us here in Latin America, in the Caribbean area, given that the emissions from agriculture, livestock, land use change, and forestry are large in Latin America and the Caribbean, accounting for about half of the total emissions. Nature-based solutions represent a significant mitigation opportunity for us. And considering that the socioeconomic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has led to an important recession in Latin American countries, this will require reinforced action to achieve a recovery aligned with the Agenda 2030 and should simultaneously be inclusive, economically viable, and with a lower carbon footprint. This implies favoring rising preferred sectors that can achieve those objectives and letting high carbon, low employment sectors sunset. This selective growth approach has been identified by ICLAC as a big push for sustainability that we have been using for green recovery. This big push for sustainability needs to be based on the coordination of technological, fiscal, financial, environmental, social, and regulatory policies. It must aim to establish a new structure of incentives for investment and for the creation of higher productivity jobs and for the development of production chains. At the same time, it should result in a smaller environmental footprint and in the restoration of the productive capacity of the natural heritage, including its environmental services. Nature-based solutions are, therefore, an important tool for increasing the region's adaptive capacity, since they reduce the impacts of climate change. For example, the protection, restoration, or management of natural forests and wetlands in watersheds, for instance, can secure and regulate the water supply and reduce the risk of floods and landslides, as well as soil erosion. Of the methods already evaluated economically and environmentally, the most promising is the integration of crops, livestock, and forestry, called integrated systems, which combine fodder, grasses, and legumes with shrubs and trees for animal feed and complementary use. These systems enable production to be diversified and intensified on the basis of natural processes, using land more sustainably than in conventional farming. Ecological interactions increase productivity, efficiency, the provision of environmental services, and ultimately the economic performance of properties. An important initiative to reduce the environmental impact and increase the efficiency of agricultural activity was done in Brazil, and it was called Low Carbon Agriculture Plan, which operated in the form of a credit line to finance change in production methods and processes. The plan was a policy of agricultural intensification based on integrated systems, which operated on a large scale, which allowed, for instance, animal stocking rates to be increased from 0.7 units per hectare in degraded areas to 5 animals per hectare in areas with integration, a threefold increase in productivity, and allowing these activities to be sink of carbon instead of a source of carbon. Thus, nature should be conserved and restored, while nature-based solutions for disaster risk reduction and climate action should be accelerated. Nature conservation and ecosystem restoration provide a range of direct benefits for producers, communities, local authorities, and the private sector, including the creation of jobs and the reduction of vulnerabilities. These investments are low cost and safe to store carbon and provide a global service to humanity. Furthermore, transitioning to a resilient and low carbon economy is a strong driver of economic recovery and the implementation of 2030 agenda. That's what we are doing here, and that's what we are supporting as technical assistance and international cooperation with several countries here in Latin America and the Caribbean region. Thank you, Aneta.
Very much, Luis. And you're from? You forgot to mention that.
Sorry, I'm working for ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and I'm working for the Sustainable Division in Human Settlements inside the ECLAC. I'm based in Santiago, Chile.
Thank you very much for being this early morning hour with us. And what you shared is very much aligned with what Dechen mentioned and what actually ESCAP is promoting as well. We are very much aligned that nature-based solutions are a fantastic option, a first instance option for CDR for us. And they have the inclusive, the socio-economic, and other impacts, which are very pertinent for our region. So thank you very much for that. I see this brotherhood here very well developed. Now I would like to go to our next speaker, Oliver Gedden, who is going to, I would like to ask you, Oliver, to give us a perspective on where does CGR stand in the European Union policies? What are the discussions currently now? And because they're actually forming a trend, right, worldwide. So if you could inform us about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anita, maybe Nigel can show the first slide, because then you can easily see what the European Union is trying to do, because we started to integrate carbon dioxide removal into, let's say, climate policy planning. Do you see a trajectory developed by the European Commission for the EU 28, so the UK is still included, for net zero pathway by 2050. And what you see that net zero mainly, of course, means emissions reductions in a conventional way. So everything you see above the zero line, but you see in 2050, you still have residual emissions. And the blue ones are non-CO2 emissions, and they're coming mainly from agriculture. We heard that today quite often. So methane, nitrous oxide, are very hard to eliminate. And below the zero line, you see in the red two types of carbon dioxide removal. The one, LULUCF, land use change in forestry, and carbon removal technologies like direct air capture combined with carbon capture and storage and geological storage. So what many surprises, even the European Union, then if you see a figure like that in a way we're already doing carbon dioxide removal, because we have a net land sink. It's mainly forestry, because starting in the 1990s, European Union, especially in the eastern parts, but also in countries like Germany, started with quite substantial afforestation programs. So what the change is, we start not only looking at what's happening above the zero line, but also what's happening below the zero line, and the numbers are quite substantial. So it would be in that planning 500 to 600 million tons of carbon dioxide removal in 2050, which is kind of 10% of our 1990 emissions. But this is the current thinking. We need to get to net zero. I mean, you already mentioned that many countries are thinking like that. We have to reduce emissions drastically, but now we also start to talk about carbon dioxide removal. And there was one major change with the new 2030 target for the European Union. You might know that we strengthened that recently, but now we are really accounting for forestry within that target, because the funny thing is, while we were doing afforestation at a very large scale, we of course accounted for it. There are accounting rules for that. They are not perfect, but there are accounting rules for that. But we never, let's say, took them into account when talking about, do we reach our targets? Now they are included. There's criticism about that, because then a minus 55% target in the old way for 2030 doesn't mean the same if you have 2 or 3 percentage points of forestry in there. And for the removal technologies, or for, let's say, some unusual ecosystem-based solutions, the European Commission now also starts a process for certification scheme, because the suite of technologies is quite broad. You could have 10 or 15 different ones, also different locations. You might want to use different ones. You need certification schemes, you need monitoring, you need reporting, you need verification. So I would say the European Union is at the point where the integration starts into mainstream climate policy, and where all the usual questions about how to deal with new technology, with new approaches, already enter not only the political sphere, but also the bureaucratic sphere of accounting and what can you do, what kind of incentives do you develop. And maybe the last word, although it's not a European Union member anymore, the United Kingdom, in fact, is the most advanced country right now in the European Union, maybe even worldwide, in thinking about carbon dioxide removal. They already not only have research programs, but also announced demonstration programs where they now incentivize pilot projects across a very broad range, from engineered to ecosystem based. I think it's like 25 projects, just to start trying what would work and what might not work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for this very interesting intervention, and we learned a lot about the issues that are being discussed in the European Union, the accounting of afforestation, the certification schemes for different carbon dioxide removal approaches, and from technology to nature-based. This is good. And now the example you gave about UK with 25 projects already on the ground is really prompting us that we need to really work more on the regulatory side, and we need to have more governance approach to it, more transparency, accountability, discussion, because the impact will be global, as the climate change is a global impact, right? So this is very good information, and it's going to continue pushing our dialogue regionally and globally. Now I would like to turn to Jan and to ask him to give us the perspective of young people, of his colleagues, of people, what they're discussing about CDR. What is can you gauge that? What is the level of discussion among the let's say, professionally involved into the climate negotiations or climate meetings people? It's very interesting to hear. Yes, thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you so much, Annette. Hearing the different speakers or different panelists for today's discussion, it's giving me sometimes chills, or sometimes like, what are they talking? You know, if I have to remove the hat of someone who is attached right now in WMO and in C2G as an intern, I can say, like, what are they talking? This is like a very big discussion. I don't even know if this topic is being taught in the youth space. But of course, for me, as someone who has deeper knowledge, I can see the importance and relevance to it in discussing about climate change. So I think in the youth sector, one of the biggest gaps in the climate movement is either lack of information, misinformation, lack of technical knowledge, or lack of capacity. So climate change to me is very, very personal. It's not just about because I want to be part of the bandwagon, and then be part of the climate activism. I survived one of the havoc effects of climate change. That's why it brought me to the movement. So in the local context, meaning from my province in Leyte, Philippines, climate change discussion exists, but carbon dioxide removal or any other information related to it is not yet available for public consumption. It might be available. It may be available, but perhaps in higher institutions that offers environmental related degrees or programs. So now, if we talk about how the decisions of carbon dioxide removal could impact my life or our life in general, in a subjective perspective, it's a matter of life and death, a do or die situation. The effects of climate change is really affecting us, and we are facing a real-time ecocide. So if we believe in the science of climate, it is the IPCC 1.5 degrees Celsius report makes clear how rapidly reductions need to be achieved to avoid or limit any overshoot of the 1.5 degrees temperature limit on the carbon dioxide emissions. Will need to be approximately half by 2030 and reach zero or lower by 2050. This means that carbon dioxide removal is an inevitable option if we are really serious in aiming our 2030 and 2050 targets. So in the global context, in the global youth movement, there is a minimal discussion or awareness about CDR. And we even have resistance from some youth organizations about this topic. I know some groups even conducted a signature campaign in rejecting the solution. So the worries from the young people is the possibilities of adverse effects if we are going to the CDR pathway, They're scared, unsure, doubtful. I think this is where our institutions and international or UN organizations should focus on: research and communication. So if the young activists have this knowledge, if they are into this topic, I think we can lessen the noise fatigue. When I say noise fatigue, because I think 10 years ago, I'm younger, I'm 18, this is the same things that we are shouting on the streets, you know. But instead of the usual pressure buildup, maybe the young people will be in a position to influence our government to look at this solution. So, Aneta, that is so far the current status in the youth space. This is minimally discussed, or sometimes the information is not yet even available in our side. Talking in a normal young individual.
Thank you very much, Jan, and that confirms exactly what our observations are. We have a little bit more time, and I would like to go with some follow-up questions to our speakers. I mean, continuing to what the comments even from Jan were, Dechen, dear, can you share with us what are the current discussions on governance and financing challenges for land-based carbon removal approaches in the global community, climate community negotiations?
So thank you very much, Aneta, for your questions on governance and financing challenges of some land-based carbon removal approaches. So if we start to think about, I mean, financing has been recognized as critical to determine the success or failure for the climate agenda. And if you start to look at climate financing and you start to look at the Paris Agreement and you look at 2.1c, you start to look at financing flows for low carbon climate resilient development. So it's not just what funds, international vertical funds available to look at climate change. And so what this does is it does for the first time, it takes central banks to really to look at where are the financial flows. And I think the work that's come from the G20 on the climate related risk disclosure and with the UNEP Finance Initiative, we have banks and insurance companies actually doing stress testing of their portfolio to look at where the investments are. So this is going to be critical. It's not, do we have $100 billion to carry out adaptation and mitigation projects? But the issue is central banks. Where do the funds go? Where does the finance go? You look at private sector, you look at climate related risk disclosure, and we also look at where our pension funds go. I mean, where are the financial flows? But if we start, and maybe if we start to look at biodiversity and land degradation conventions and achieving the SDGs, I think what is critical is we have to look at both biological diversity and climate change. And this year at the 15th Conference of Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, we will have the Global Biodiversity Framework. So it's got to be ambitious and pragmatic. And we have to connect the dots between climate change and biodiversity. If you've looked at, and I know that the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and they've actually started to look at, I mean, many of the instruments in terms of biodiversity conservation, looking at land-based sources, and where some of the areas they've looked at, and if I could just say, they've looked at market-based instruments, they've looked at payment for ecosystem services, biodiversity offset schemes, blue carbon sequestration, cap and trade programs, green bonds, trust funds, new legal instruments. But what we're hearing from countries is that the land-based conservation, you can't get resources for it. And if you look at baselines, for old growth forests, you don't have the financing for it. So we need to start to look at some of the debt for nature swaps. You need to start to look at what you can do there. The other aspect about financing, and there's quite a lot of work that's being done now with national budgets. We've been doing climate tagging, and if you start to work with ministries of finance, you start to look at disaster risk reduction, and you start to look at investing through the national budgets, you're able to make a stronger case with the ministries of finance, with the treasury, with the central banks. So when you start to look at, carbon dioxide removal, we really have to go beyond, can I access financing for projects? It has to go, where are the financial flows going? Are the financial, when we had Mark Carney talk about, climate change, you need the Financial Stability Board to talk about climate change. You need central banks to talk about climate change. So the approach has to be bigger, and the approach can't be getting ministries of finance coming to a conference of parties to talk about climate change. It's really looking at the fundamentals. And here, a lot of the work with natural capital accounting, look at ecosystem services. I mean, some of the basic work in terms of environmental accounting becomes really important. Thank you, Aneta.
Thank you very much, Darshan. This was really very, very good, reminding us that we need the central banks in the core of that discussion with climate finance and focusing on the swaps for nature, debt swaps for nature, debt swaps for climate is actually a green post-COVID reduction pathway as well, and it's very timely, especially for least developed countries. And all the economic instruments to support nature-based solutions, which is basically the first very good step to carbon capture. Fantastic. Thank you very much for this reminder. Joyshri, I would like to come back to you because we have similar issues with the research on governance for the CGR. Is it enough? Is it enough, the research? What more we need to focus on? And the interlinkages that you mentioned before on ecosystems. How can governments do this? And they need to put more effort, right? Can you tell us a little bit more on that?
Yeah, but again, I would say that when we look at the climate action, it is very important, and I would like to reiterate all the time that we just cannot look into one option. I mean, that's the mistake we will be doing, because all the reports are clearly showing that we have to look at the portfolio of action, the whole bunch of actions together. And from that point of view, even 1.5 report also shows that it is possible to mitigate in such a way so that you might not need to go beyond just the reforestation or afforestation. So there is a pathway for the whole world to decide whether they want to go for high-cost technological intervention more and more for CDR, or they want to mitigate more, which are less costly. So when we talk of finance, we need to be really looking for where lies the least cost option, where lies the most benefit. And from that point of view, you just cannot look into the CDR and how we can get the money for CDR, but we should look at it as a whole group of actions with mitigation and the CDR, and what kind of CDR and in what time scale and how the money will be flowing. Because we must remember that I mean, in 1.5 report, we could show it very clearly that even by looking into the mitigation options in the supply side and add to it the demand side responses, energy efficiency and many other demand reduction, waste reduction, and many of those behavioral measures which you can include in the societal scale, and where you can generate more action and which are less costly. And then you reduce the demand for CDR more and more. So when you talk of financing, you really need to see that how you can reduce the demand for CDR, and so that you mitigate more and you do. And we are now seeing, even in the sixth assessment cycle, that from the demand side intervention, you can reduce the need for CDR a lot. So because unless we make these choices at the societal scale, we will not be able to say that how much money need to go to for CDR, right? So this is very important. I don't think we have done those research well. So it might be that we might be putting in money in something which we could easily do more least cost option way and more benefit. And then secondly, what I would suggest is also that is something very important, that we need to understand that when I just gave an example from the ocean-based, because this is becoming more and more in the discussion nowadays, and where I want to say that many of the risks that can emerge from different interventions in the ocean system will actually require local level research, what it means for the local environmental and societal impact. And prior research are essential to avoid worsening of inequalities and creation of new social injustices. In one of our recent review, what we found that women are very much involved in traditional coastal ecosystem and forest ecosystem also based economic activities. And so there is almost no studies which looks into the distributional impact from the gender perspective while making a transition to this blue economy or to the CDR based economies, So it is very important to look into that, because otherwise the injustice will be doubled to the already disadvantaged group. So it's just the climate action cannot be supported unless there is a justice in transition. So you cannot expect inclusive participatory process unless there is justice is ensured. And so I'll give one more example, that seabed storage can, theoretically, geophysically, it can, it can happen in the territorial water, but then there is need for scientific understanding if these technologies are going to be used safely or without unintended consequences, like what it has been said that youths are against these. Why? Because there is less information available. Scientific information is not provided to them. It's not only that it's not provided, it's not known. Even the scientists do not agree on all these different range of technologies and how safe they are on different ranges, right? So this is something very important, that this research is made more clear and accessible to all. And even for the carbon storage in the seabed requires significant further research before it is ready to safely make a substantive contribution to solving the climate problem. So I would say that when we talk of SDGs, it is 2030 target, then I would say that our focus and finance need to be more on the actual implementation of the mitigation and adaptation options. And then we need to look for longer term, but then starting now the research on the other carbon dioxide removal options, or how we can minimize that by mobilizing the societal responses on the demand side, so that we can have less CDR requirement for in the future.
Thank you very much, Joyshri. These were very, very passionate, and I like all your comments, of course, definitely demand side management, mitigation. But I would like still to go back to what Dechen said, that we need to know where the monies are going. National money should not go for fossil fuels anymore and for fossil fuel subsidies. And one of the good tools is carbon pricing, so we could really curb our mitigation. So 2030 agenda implementation gives us a chance to do a lot of that mitigation, adaptation, and also prevention. Thank you very much. So I would like now to go to Luis back, and maybe Luis, you could inform us, if possible, short and maybe just to the point, how is your commission addressing the governance challenge in your region, which is more homogeneous than ours, basically?
No, that's a very good question, Aneta. It's in a very important one. We are trying to use this concept of environmental big push, and the general idea around this big push is the coordination of policies, and this is the main idea. So actually we are not trying to create or to use or to push for new economic instruments, because we are just trying to work with what we already have, and this is one of the consequences. This is to increase the level of governance. So the idea of coordinating the coordination of policies is to how we could transform the fiscal policies. So we have a potential of transformation in the current fiscal policies that we must use that. We must review the incentives, and the good ones and the bad ones. We need to reorient the public budgets, because most of the times there's no such a thing like we is lacking money, that we do not have money to invest. Most of the times is how we are investing our money, how we are financing projects, and what we are doing with the money that we have. So if we succeed to coordinate a little bit better the current policies, meaning a better fiscal policies, a better set of incentives, a huge reorientation of the public budgets that we have at local level, at regional level, at national level. This and if you are linking everything in a coherent direction, you really get a good strength to promote changes and really reorient the current policies that we have, and the reorient the economic development. More than trying to create new instruments, we think that we could generate some governance, a better governance through the coordination of policies. So this is the main idea that we are trying to apply, and we are applying that for sustainable mobility, circular economy, ecosystem-based adaptation. So a set of policies that could generate this transition for a sustainable society, that could facilitate our need to promote a green recovery. We are living a pandemic situation. We need to build a resilient and a low carbon economy, and at the same time generate millions and millions of new jobs. So this, for reaching these goals, we need to act more in a more strong way in the coordination of policies and get everything done at the same time. This is the idea that we are trying to work for. Behind of this is the theory of the environmental big push.
Thank you very much, Luis. Very much aligned with our policies currently as well, where we're also focusing on nature-based solutions for recovery and for creating jobs, for the opportunities for growth there. Now I would like to go back to Oliver and just to bring another dimension of the current dialogue. Some of the countries, let's say India, for example, mentioned that at the latest UN conference that the rich countries need to go beyond net zero, and they need also to look into negative removing carbon. So maybe that is now the big push coming from some developing countries, especially from our region, for CDR. But then what can you say on this? What are the potential threats there if diverting finances from supporting low development countries into CDR? Is that really good? And what are the negative implications, and what are the governance issues?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's an interesting development, but many saw it coming. If you have a global net zero target, like we have kind of, we have that vision. It's also in the Paris Agreement. Then, of course, the question is, do all countries need to meet that at the same time? Of course not. That would not be fair. And that's what brought, I think, India's energy minister to say, well, I mean, we still have time to get there, and maybe the OECD countries should not only be there first. I think that's already clear. Many have 2050 targets for net zero, but then also go net negative, which sounds a little bit outrageous to already talk about net negative, although the IPCC pathways kind of assume that we go there globally. And if you remember my slide, net zero means having the same amount of removals then of emissions, and it will come mainly from reducing emissions and scaling up removals a little, and to get net negative by just doing more CDR and reducing your emissions further, which will be possible even after net zero. But it could become kind of a distraction then if OECD countries, developed countries, start talking about net negative already, let's say in the second half of the century, instead of pushing the emissions down right now, their own emissions, and pushing finance up. So it could become a distraction, a promise for the future, and it sounds great, or we're gonna get net negative, because at some point you might see that a country excuses its inaction by saying, well, we will make up for this later by going net negative. That, of course, would be detrimental. Similar to now saying, okay, we can go net zero by just pushing up CDR and continue to emit like we did, with something we see with many companies who are now investing in offsetting schemes, where you have the feeling, okay, they don't intend to reduce their emissions, and that's just intent to buy into imaginary carbon dioxide removal, and that's of course needs to be avoided. Net zero and net negative will mainly come from reducing emissions, but of course it depends on upscaling CDR as well. But I think the focus still has to be on emissions reduction.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Jan, I would like back to come to you. What would you like to take accountable the governments for? What are they missing in this intergenerational discussions that we have here, and also with relations to carbon removal?
Yeah, just to unleash a little activist in me, I would say, are they even thinking? You know, even the simple NDC and the Paris Agreement, we faced a lot of issues moving forward. So, I mean, going back to our topic, for me, our policymakers should think less on the economic gains, because I think one of the great barriers in moving forward in any solutions that we are providing scientifically is barred by the economic perspective. Like, you know, we need to be rich in the next few years. But, you know, there will be no economic development in the next 10 to 30 years if we are facing a planetary crisis. And if we will be spending so much in disaster response, for me, it's not a rational thinking. So as of the moment, the usual move of our policymakers are geared towards cutting emissions, and it will not be enough if we want to maintain a habitable and sustainable planet. So in my perspective, as a young activist or a young activist is they should support CDR if the science supports it. If this is a good pathway to help us address the climate crisis, the policymakers should help in allocating financial resources for its research and implementation ASAP. It shouldn't be just in 2035. And of course, as mentioned earlier, if Joy, Shuri, and I were mentioning about lack of information and even not available to the public, the government will maybe in a good position to help us inform the public, educate the public, so we can have support as well in maybe nature-based solutions. Maybe the young people can be in the position to help us implement this one. So I think for me, intergenerational justice issues, or it's a matter of stop the economic mindset first, because I think that is really the biggest barrier.
Thank you very much, John. This was very, very, very good intervention. I look at the chats and we have a lot of interesting statements, comments, and what comes to my attention very strongly is the call from our participants, attendees, to look more for nature protection, nature conservation, and to push the private sector to go into that direction rather into technologies and more technological innovation. So we need a stronger governance, I guess, that will help us to bring more nature conservation, parks, green areas, bringing the ecosystems approaches. Who would like also to give a comment on this? Because this is the private sector, we need to think of how to involve them more. Who wants to give a go for it? Joytree, okay.
What I would think is that, when we talk of the nature-based solution, I mean, for a very long time, there has been this discussion in the environmental economics and in ecological economics space, that how you introduce the payment for ecosystem services, right? So how you make it a livelihood option for people, and a livelihood option is not about the poor people's job, so that you really make a good living out of making the nature-based conservation, whether you will call it conservation or different kind of programs we need to see, right? So if it is mangrove protection and then say Amazonian forest reserve maintenance, how are you going to work out payment for ecosystem services? Who pays for it? Where is the benefit? So that discourse we are not discussing at all, because we have never talked about, managing a global common, and how do we think as global economy for that. I do agree that we should not be talking of economy, but I think this is also a very a partial approach, that economy will be there. How we can make it more complete, where it is missing, and so that we can broaden the scope of human well-being measurement, going beyond just GDP measurement or income measurement, is something which we need to look into. So how we can bring in the well-being concept, payment for ecosystem services, nature-based solutions as a mainstream economic activities, and which shows up in economic progress indicator, are very important. So as it has been said, that natural resource accounting, how we can bring in. So there are multiple things that need to happen, and just not one single action. So from that point of view, I think these are the discourses, and these are the methods which needs to be taught also, so education system really need to gear towards these new things. It's just not the old things that, so new courses, new capacity building. These are very important. Capacity building is not just top up, it should be real education. And so that's something which is very important, and which our young friend already said, that youths are not yet really trained appropriately to understand what is going to happen. So I think these are the ways where we should be really putting our hands on.
Thank you very much, Joystree. And Dechen, I saw your hand. You wanted to mention something?
Thank you, Aneta. Aneta, when we brought forests into climate change, it was when there's a coalition of countries that came up with reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. So we had countries, and then they came up with targets. Today we have, the peatlands, and a group of countries that are very rich in peatlands. You look at Peru, Indonesia, Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, and they're really looking at how do you conserve peatlands and how do you bring it into the nationally determined contributions. One of the silver lining with the global COVID-19 pandemic is it shows us that we need to make peace with nature. And as my colleague Jan says, it shows us that if you don't make peace with nature, the economic consequences are devastating. And then that brings home the fact that climate crises will be devastating. So for the first time, there is an opportunity to look at, when we make peace with nature, what does this mean for us? And for those of us who've been on the margins of, talking about conservation, protection, the moral imperative, we actually have a really sound economic argument. And I think really this is an opportunity for all of us to be able to go forward. Because when we start to look at the climate crises, you saw what, COVID-19 pandemic did to us for 18 months. It's continuing to do for us. Look at what's going to happen to climate. You're going to have disasters, no fresh water, agriculture, diseases, migration, refugees. We're going to have it at a scale. And I think for the first time, the general public actually realizes what this could mean. Thank you, Netta.
Very, very good points, Dechen, bringing us to the reality of life.
May I
Luis,
contribute to the point?
Yes, please.
Okay, no, thank you. No, I'm just thinking the importance of promoting the transition for sustainability, and this transition should be better planned. We know what we need to do. We have enough technologies. We have human resources to promote this transition, but we are not doing very well in organizing a strategy for this transition to overcome the initial barriers. Some of these barriers are just ideological. Others are financial. Others really need a special process to overcome legal issues or the transformation of the fiscal policies, allowing the new to appear and to the old process to gone. So this a better preparation, a better strategy, in a coordinated strategy, I think it is quite important. And this is something that we are not doing very well, because we know what we need to do in order to promote an energy transition. We know what we need to do to preserve and restore the productive capacity of the soils, and to have a good productivity of water, a sustainable supply of water. We know how to do that from a technical point of view, but when it comes to how to organize the political process for this transformation. We need to think better, to organize better with governments and include the private sector, the civil society, and have a better strategy for this transition. This is really something that we need to put some effort and devote some energy for this.
Thank you, Luis. Oliver, I know that you're burning also to make a comment.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the, let's say, how do we distinguish certain approaches? And I think what many have been calling nature-based solutions, I think it's mainly about avoiding further degradation and further, let's say, emissions. It's not necessarily about removing, of course it is as well, but at the same time, the carbon stored will be quite vulnerable to reversal, as we all know, also in a warming climate. So I think in science, the debate is moving towards how durable is the carbon storage actually. Although we don't have much expectation with deliberate geological storage, it is deemed to be more durable. Also, there are options in between, like enhanced mineral weathering, where you wouldn't see, also a natural chemical process, where you wouldn't see that kind of risk for impermanence. So I think we have to look at it effort by effort, also region by region, but it's very clear that ecosystem-based measures will have much more local co-benefits, and that's also a good reason why to do it.
Oliver, thank you very much, Oliver. We are informed that we will be getting soon cut. I just want to catch up with what Dechen said, making peace with nature tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Bangkok time, 11 o'clock Japanese time, or GMT +9. Please join the session 3 of track 1, where ESCAP is leading a whole big debate for 2 hours of very fantastic speakers. And yes, thank you very much for all the panelists of joining. This was fantastic. And this will be streamed on the YouTube, and people can see it further and also share their views. Please go to the website of the SDG Help Desk, where you have a lot of condensed and interesting information that you could use in your work or your advocacy. And we invite the young people to join and to learn more, and why also investing in also in fossil fuels to capture the carbon there rather than only new technologies, right? So with that, I think we're reaching almost the end, right? Support team.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. It has been a very rich discussion. I didn't intend to make any substantive points, just as a follow-up. As Anita said, we will send some key takeaways from our discussion today to the organizers of the Climate Week. And also I've shared some links for if you want to find further resources on this topic. Lastly, I would like to say a huge thank you to all of our distinguished speakers and colleagues from ESCAP and from C2G who are behind the scene and who have made this event successful. And finally, to all of you who have participated in this event. So with that said, we close this event. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much. Very exciting.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.